I'm Olivia Dean, 27 years old, a sergeant in the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division. Tonight was supposed to be our 6-week wedding anniversary. That night, my husband Kalen said, "This body is mine. You get nothing from me." His voice as cold as ice as he turned his back on me in our bedroom. The words struck me like a whip, leaving me frozen in the silk nightgown I had so carefully chosen for our anniversary. 6 weeks, 6 weeks of marriage, and my husband had never once touched me. Once Kalen was asleep, I did something I'd never dared to do before. I opened his tablet, and that's when my world fell apart. Before I tell my story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe. This story is for anyone who has ever put their trust in the wrong person, where the most dangerous enemy is sometimes the one sleeping next to you every night. The silence that followed his words was heavier than any physical blow. It pressed down on me, suffocating. I stood like a statue in the suddenly alien room, the delicate lace of the nightgown scratching my skin like a cruel joke. For weeks, I had told myself a story. He's stressed. The work he does, counseling veterans, it takes a toll. I had made excuses for the distance, for how his eyes would look straight through me. I was the wife of a good man doing important work. I had to be patient, supportive. I had to be better. Wasn't that what a good wife did? I'd tried everything. I spent a Sunday making his favorite Southern meal, buttermilk fried chicken, fluffy biscuits, creamy mashed potatoes. He'd barely touched it. "I appreciate the effort, Liv," he'd said, pushing his plate away. "But my mind is on a soldier who's about to lose his home. I don't have an appetite." He made my effort feel small, selfish. I'd even gotten tickets to a Carolina Panthers game, thinking it would be a fun, normal couple thing to do. He'd glanced at them and sighed. "You should take a friend. I have to be on call for a crisis line this weekend. Some guys, they can't be left alone." Each rejection was a small paper cut, and I'd blamed the paper, not the hand that held it. I had convinced myself I was the problem. Not devoted enough, not understanding enough. His coldness was a reflection of my own failure. And tonight, standing in the dark, his words finally shattered that illusion. This wasn't about his work. This was about me. His steady breathing filled the room, the sound of a man at peace, without a single worry. My own breath was a ragged thing trapped in my chest. My training, the years of discipline in the 82nd Airborne, screamed at me to maintain control. Assess the situation, identify the threat. But this wasn't a battlefield I recognized. The threat was in my bed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear and a terrible dawning clarity. I moved on silent feet, the way I'd been taught in hostile territory. The tablet was on his nightstand, charging. Its dark screen reflected my distorted face. My hand trembled as I reached for it. This was a line I'd never crossed, a violation of the trust I thought we had. But what trust was left to violate? It unlocked with his birthday. Easy. Too easy. My fingers felt numb navigating the home screen. There were no incriminating texts, no hidden dating apps. For a heart-stopping moment, shame washed over me. Maybe I was wrong, just a paranoid, broken woman. Then I saw it. A plain folder sitting innocuously among app icons. The label was simple, chilling. Project AD, my initials. My pulse roared in my ears. I tapped the folder open. It wasn't photos or secret letters. It was a cold, clinical assembly of my life. A PDF of the prenuptial agreement he'd insisted on. My credit reports from all 3 bureaus. And worst of all, an Excel spreadsheet. When I opened it, my stomach churned. It was a meticulous list of every asset to my name. My savings, my retirement account, and there, highlighted in yellow, was the line item that made the bile rise in my throat. The SGLI, the Service Members Group Life Insurance Policy my father, a command sergeant major, had left me when he was killed in Afghanistan. I scrolled further, my vision blurring. A subfolder contained emails with a financial attorney I didn't recognize. I read the subject lines, my blood turning to ice. Maximizing asset division. Legal loopholes in early term divorce. Spousal fault clauses. I wasn't his wife. I was Project Olivia Dean. This wasn't a marriage built on coldness. It was a business plan. A hostile takeover of my life, financed by my father's death. The nausea I'd suppressed finally won. I clamped a hand over my mouth and stumbled to the bathroom, retching silently into the toilet until there was nothing left but dry, agonizing heaves. The next morning, I faced him across the breakfast table. The man I saw was not the monster from the tablet. He was the man I thought I'd married. Charming, attentive, perfect. He was smiling, flipping blueberry pancakes. "Morning, sleepyhead," he chirped. "You looked so peaceful, I didn't want to wake you." The contrast made me feel dizzy. He asked why I looked so tired. The lie came easily, a defense mechanism kicking in. "Just a bad night's sleep." He walked over, his face a mask of concern, and placed his hand on my forehead. "You don't feel warm. You have to take care of yourself, my love." His touch, which I once craved, felt like a spider on my skin. I fought every instinct to flinch. I was looking at an actor, a venomous snake hiding its fangs behind a smile. And I knew, in that moment, I had to become an actor too. I had to play my part, the loving, unsuspecting wife. Later that day, I told him I was going shopping at the Cross Creek Mall. Instead, I drove the familiar route to the address for his Veterans Support Center. It was in a nondescript strip mall. But there was no office, no center. There was just a UPS store. My heart sank. I walked inside, my voice hollow as I asked the clerk about the suite number he'd given me. It was a P.O. box, a ghost address. I sat in my truck, staring at the storefront. The ordinary setting made his deception feel even more profound. The pain that had been a dull ache was now sharpening into a cold, hard anger. He hadn't just lied. He had constructed an entire false reality around me. And I had walked right into it. The instinct of a soldier, a forward observer, took over. I needed more information. I needed to know who my enemy truly was. That night, as he once again turned his back on me with a tired excuse, I felt no pain. Only a chilling, absolute clarity. I lay awake in the dark, my eyes wide open, not seeing the shadows in the room, but the layout of a new battlefield. My mind, a storm of hurt and confusion, was now quiet, focused, and strategic. I would verify his past. I would track his movements. I would uncover the truth behind Project AD. I remembered something my father used to tell me, a lesson drilled into all his soldiers. A good soldier never attacks blind. You gather intelligence, you identify the enemy's weaknesses, and you strike when they least expect it. My marriage was now a war zone, and I would not be the casualty. The decision I made in the darkness of our bedroom wasn't born of emotion. It was a tactical shift. The grief and shock were still there, a cold, heavy weight in my gut, but I packed them away. In the field, you can't operate when you're compromised. You compartmentalize, you focus on the mission. And my new mission was Kaylin. I turned the small spare bedroom, the one filled with unopened moving boxes, into my operations center, my office. There, with the door locked, I began what we in the military call OSINT, Open Source Intelligence. It's amazing what you can find when you know how to look. I sat at my laptop, my fingers moving with a new, cold purpose. I typed his name, Kaylin Vance, into the search bar. His online presence was a masterpiece of deception. His LinkedIn profile was perfect, showcasing a man dedicated to healing America's heroes. It listed him as a mental health consultant for veterans, complete with glowing testimonials. Kaylin's guidance was instrumental in my transition back to civilian life. One read, supposedly from a decorated Marine Corps veteran. It all looked so legitimate, so convincing. It was the profile of the man I thought I had married. But a soldier verifies their intel. I found the Marine online. It wasn't hard, and sent him a short, polite message, asking if he could elaborate on his experience with Kaylin for a project I was working on. The reply came back in less than an hour, blunt and unequivocal. "Ma'am, I've never heard of the guy." I stared at the words on the screen, a bitter certainty settling in my bones. It wasn't just one lie, It was a whole world he had built. A digital web designed to ensnare people exactly like me. I wasn't just married to a liar, I was the target of a predator. Before I went any deeper down the rabbit hole, I felt a pull to go somewhere. A need to ground myself. I drove to downtown Fayetteville to the Airborne and Special Operations Museum. It's a quiet, solemn place. I walked past the displays of historical artifacts until I reached the Memorial Garden. There, on a wall of polished black granite, were the names of the fallen. I found my father's name, Command Sergeant, Major Robert Dean, and traced the cool, sharp letters with my fingertips. He had died for truth, for honor. Kalen was trying to steal the legacy of that sacrifice. Standing there, I felt a surge of strength. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore, I was fighting for my father's name. That resolve carried me into the next phase, the paper trail. That night, I waited until Kalen was in the shower, the sound of the water masking any noise I might make. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I slipped into his home office, opened the bottom drawer of his desk where he kept his files, and quickly photographed every page of his last 3 months of bank and credit card statements with my phone. He thought I'd never look. He thought I was too trusting, too naive. He was right. But not anymore. Back in my own makeshift office, I spread the printed images out on the floor, arranging them by date. It looked like a tactical map of his lies. Those work trips to Washington, D.C. to lobby for veterans' rights? They were weekend getaways to Charleston, South Carolina. The charges weren't for conference rooms. They were for boutique hotels and expensive dinners for two. A charge for seminar materials was a bill from a high-end restaurant overlooking the water. And then I saw it. A charge that made my breath catch. A single, large purchase from a luxury jewelry store in Charleston. For a diamond necklace. A bitter smile touched my lips. That definitely wasn't for me. The final piece of the initial reconnaissance had to be visual confirmation. Surveillance. A week later, Kalen announced he had a long day of meetings with potential donors. The perfect opportunity. I called my unit and took a personal day, citing a doctor's appointment. I changed into civilian clothes, jeans, a nondescript t-shirt, and a baseball cap pulled down low over my sunglasses. I got into my dad's old Ford pickup truck. It was the one thing of his I'd kept, a beast of a vehicle Kalen always called folksy, with a condescending smirk. Today, its rugged anonymity was my best camouflage. I followed him from a safe distance. He didn't drive toward any of the city's office buildings. Instead, he got on the highway, heading east. An hour later, he pulled into the parking lot of a manicured, exclusive golf course in Pinehurst. I parked several rows away, my position giving me a clear line of sight. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out my compact, military-issue binoculars. Through the lenses, I watched him get out of his car. A moment later, a blonde woman in a stylish sundress walked up to him. He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. He hugged her, then slid his arm possessively around her waist as they walked toward the clubhouse. They didn't look like business partners. They looked like lovers. A hot flash of jealousy shot through me, sharp and ugly, but I pushed it down instantly. Emotion was a liability. The mission was everything. I needed a name. That night, back at my map of lies, I cross-referenced the dates. The Charleston trip, the day at the golf course. My eyes scanned the bank statements, looking for a corresponding pattern. And there it was. Not a charge, but a series of payments. On the Venmo transaction list, one username appeared again and again, receiving money from Kalen on dates that lined up perfectly. The username was Sarah Vance. Serafina Vance. My heart gave a hard, painful thud. That was her. The woman from the golf course. The recipient of the diamond necklace. The truth felt within reach, but something was wrong. Something didn't fit. Vance. They had the same last name. A wave of confusion washed over the cold anger. Was this his sister, an ex-wife he'd never mentioned? Or was it something else entirely? Something darker than I could possibly imagine? The question hung in the silence of the room, becoming the new focal point of my entire investigation. My mission had a new objective. I had to find out who Serafina Vance really was. The question of who Serafina Vance was became an obsession, a splinter under my skin that I couldn't ignore. For days, I operated in a state of high alert, playing the part of the dutiful wife while my mind raced, searching for an opportunity. It came a week later. Kalen walked into the kitchen, nodding his tie, the picture of a busy professional. "Liv, something's come up," he said, his tone perfectly pitched between regret and importance. "I have to fly down to Atlanta for a couple of days, an emergency donor meeting." He kissed my cheek, a dry, papery touch that made my skin crawl. "I'll be back before you know it," he promised. I smiled, a hollow gesture that didn't reach my eyes. "Be safe," I said. The moment the front door clicked shut, the clock started ticking. I knew this was my window. His office, a room I'd always found intimidating and meticulously organized, now felt like enemy territory I had to infiltrate. My objective was to find anything connecting him to Serafina. I started methodically, drawer by drawer, file by file. Nothing. It was all pristine, well-ordered files for his fake charity. Frustration began to build. I got down on my hands and knees, my eyes scanning the space beneath his heavy oak desk. Tucked away in the deepest shadow was a small black metal box, locked. My heart hammered. This was it. I searched his desk again, this time for keys, finding a small ring with several unfamiliar ones in the pen holder. My fingers fumbled, adrenaline making them clumsy. The third key I tried clicked open the lock. Inside wasn't a trove of documents, but another set of keys. One of them was small and ornate, for old furniture. My eyes darted around the room and landed on the desk itself. On the side, almost invisible against the dark wood, was a keyhole I had never noticed before. A secret drawer. I held my breath as I turned the key. The drawer slid open with a soft, well-oiled sound. It was filled with legal documents. The first one I picked up was thick, official paper. A marriage certificate. My stomach plunged. I read the names, my vision tunneling. Kalen Vance and Serafina Vance. The date of marriage was 3 years ago. So the answer was ex-wife. No. Wait. Current wife. He hadn't divorced her. He was a bigamist. My mind struggled to process the sheer criminality of it. I was living in an illegal sham marriage. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold my phone steady as I took pictures of the document. He wasn't just an adulterer, he was a felon. But there was more. Beneath the marriage certificate was another folder. I opened it and found 2 birth certificates. I scanned the first one. Kalen Robert Vance. I saw the names of his parents. Then I looked at the second, Serafina Ann Vance. I read it again. And again. The parents' names were identical. The world tilted on its axis. A wave of pure, visceral disgust washed over me, so strong it made me gag. They weren't husband and wife, they were brother and sister. The realization hit me not like a thought, but like a physical blow. The trips to Charleston, the hand on her waist, the diamond necklace. It wasn't an affair. It was a sick, twisted conspiracy. The couple act was a grotesque stage play designed to hide an incestuous, criminal partnership. The room felt contaminated, the air thick with the filth of their secret. Shaking, I dug deeper and pulled out the original copy of our prenuptial agreement. I sat on the floor, the document spread around me, and read it again. This time, I wasn't a hopeful fiancé. I was a soldier analyzing enemy intelligence. The complex legal jargon that Kalen had explained away with a reassuring smile now revealed its fangs. He had drawn my attention to clauses about mutual respect, but he'd skimmed over the most important part. Section 4B. It stated that if the marriage was terminated within 1 year due to spousal fault, the initiating party would forfeit 90% of all assets they brought into the union. And fault was defined with insidious breadth, including everything from infidelity to simple, irreconcilable differences. My father's SGLI was listed by name as my primary asset. The plan was suddenly, horribly clear. It was a perfect, diabolical trap. Marry me. Create a cold, loveless environment to make my life unbearable. Push me, through emotional neglect and cruelty, to be the one who demanded a divorce. And then, use the very document he'd sold as a shield to protect me, to legally strip me of 90% of my father's legacy. I sat there, on the floor of my enemy's office, in the house that was never truly my home, surrounded by the architecture of my own destruction. The scale of the deception was monstrous. I felt small, isolated, and utterly, terrifyingly alone. This wasn't a fight I could win with discipline and training alone. This was a war fought with weapons I didn't understand, on a battlefield of legal loopholes and depraved family secrets. I was outmatched. I felt so alone in that moment, surrounded by a conspiracy so twisted I could barely breathe. If you believe that no one should ever have to fight a battle like this alone, please support this story by hitting the like button and comment with a simple, "You are not alone," to show solidarity. As I sat there, paralyzed by the sheer evil of it all, a memory of my mother surfaced. She was a woman of deep faith, and she had a favorite verse she'd quote whenever I faced something that seemed impossible. "Then you will know the truth," she would say, her voice calm and steady, "and the truth will set you free." I never understood it as a child. But now, in the darkest moment of my life, I did. This horrifying, disgusting truth wasn't a prison. It was a weapon. It was my key to freedom. I stood up, my body no longer shaking. A cold, hard resolve settled where the fear and disgust had been. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed a professional. I needed a shark. I remembered a name, mentioned in passing by one of my commanding officers a year ago. A lawyer who specialized in complex financial fraud targeting service members. A woman with a reputation for being brilliant, relentless, and utterly terrifying in a courtroom. Genevieve Croft. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady as I looked up her firm. I pressed the call button. When a calm voice answered, I spoke, my own voice even and clear, stripped of all emotion. "Hello," I said. "I need to schedule an appointment with Ms. Croft. It's an emergency." That call wasn't a plea for help. It was the first shot in a war. Walking into Genevieve Croft's law firm felt like stepping onto a different planet. I'd expected cold marble, intimidating mahogany, and the sterile air of corporate power. Instead, her office was warm and inviting, with comfortable armchairs and walls adorned not with diplomas, but with dozens of framed photos. They were pictures of her with smiling soldiers, sailors, and airmen, men and women in uniform, all of them looking at her with a gratitude that was palpable. This wasn't a shark's lair, it was a sanctuary. Genevieve herself was in her late 50s, with a sharp, intelligent face, silver hair pulled back in an elegant twist, and eyes that missed nothing. She listened to my entire story without a single interruption. I laid out the evidence on her coffee table, the photos of the documents, the bank statements, the timeline of deceit. I explained the sham marriage, the prenup, and the horrifying truth about Kaylin and Serafina. My voice was steady, but inside I was braced for skepticism, for the probing questions of a lawyer who had seen it all. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Genevieve looked from the papers back to my face, her gaze unwavering. She didn't offer pity. She offered something far better. Belief. "Well, Sergeant," she said, her voice a low, confident hum. "You've already done half my job for me. The evidence collection is impeccable." A small, grim smile touched her lips. These people aren't just getting divorced. They're not going to see the light of day for a very, very long time. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. For the first time, I wasn't just a victim, I was a credible witness. The fear that had been my constant companion for weeks began to recede, replaced by a fragile spark of hope. Genevieve picked up her phone. "Marcus, I've got one for you," she said, her tone all business. "It's right up your alley. Yes, another marriage fraud case targeting a soldier. But this one is a new level of filth." A few hours later, I was sitting in a quiet, secluded booth at a coffee shop downtown. A large man slid into the seat across from me. This was Marcus Thorne. He was built like a retired linebacker, with a calm, weathered face and eyes that seemed to absorb everything without giving anything away. He was a former CID special agent, Genevieve had explained, and the best private investigator she had ever worked with. I watched as he studied the evidence I'd gathered, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he handled the printouts. He wasn't shocked by the financial fraud. But when I explained the relationship between Kaylin and Serafina, I saw a flicker of something in his otherwise placid eyes, a deep, cold anger. He didn't comment on the depravity of it. He just nodded slowly, his focus entirely on the mechanics of their crime. "This is a professional pattern," he said, his voice a deep baritone. "The targeting of military personnel, the manufactured identity, the legal trap. These two have done this before." He looked at me, and for the first time, I noticed the heavy gold ring on his finger, the unmistakable crest of the United States Military Academy at West Point. Pinned discreetly to the lapel of his blazer was a small worn CID insignia. He saw me looking. "My father served in the 82nd, he said quietly. "Command Sergeant Major, just like yours." He looked me straight in the eye, and the way he said it changed everything. It wasn't with pity. It was with the profound respect of one soldier acknowledging another. "Sergeant Dean," he said, his voice losing its detached, analytical tone. "Your father was a legend. Now, you tell me, how are we going to take these bastards down?" "We." The word hit me with the force of a physical impact. It was the first time in this entire nightmare that I wasn't an I. For weeks, I had been completely, terrifyingly alone. Now, I had a team. Marcus was as good as his reputation. Within 48 hours, he had leveraged his old network and uncovered a trail of filth that stretched across the country. Kaylin and Serafina were predators who moved from one military town to the next. He found evidence of at least 3 similar marriages targeting service members who had recently come into large sums of money. A Navy SEAL in San Diego, California, who'd received a massive re-enlistment bonus, and an Army captain in Killeen, Texas, who had inherited family money. They were a mobile, incestuous crime syndicate preying on the lonely and the vulnerable. Marcus laid it all out for me. "You're not the first victim, Olivia," he said, using my first name for the first time. "But you can be the last. Do you have the courage to see this through to the end?" Back in Genevieve's office, the 3 of us sat around her large conference table. It felt like a war room. Marcus had a whiteboard up, mapping out the Vance's entire network of lies. This was no longer just about getting me out of a fraudulent marriage. It was about dismantling a criminal enterprise. "We can't just go to the police yet," Genevieve explained, her sharp eyes fixed on me. "They'll spook, destroy evidence. We need to catch them in the act of trying to secure your assets. We need to spring a trap." Marcus named the plan Operation Tempest. The strategy was bold and incredibly risky. It required me to go back into that house, to continue playing the part of the heartbroken, defeated wife. More than that, I had to be the one to initiate the divorce proceedings, just as they wanted. I had to walk willingly into their trap so that we could spring ours. Genevieve watched me, her expression serious. "Can you do it, Sergeant?" she asked. "This will require nerves of steel. You'll be the bait." I looked at these 2 strangers who had become my chosen family, my allies. A lawyer who fought for soldiers and an investigator who honored their legacy. They believed me. They were fighting for me. I straightened my shoulders and met their gaze one by one. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but the resolve was stronger. "I'm a soldier," I said, my voice clear and steady. "This is my mission." The days that followed felt like a deep cover mission behind enemy lines. Every morning was a performance. I had to smile when Kaylin's hand brushed my shoulder, feign concern when he recounted fabricated stories about his work, and maintain the illusion of a wife who was simply sad, not suspicious. The house, once my sanctuary, had become a stage, and I was its lead actress, playing a role that grated against every fiber of my being. Dinners were the worst form of torture. I'd sit across the table from him, pushing food around my plate as he spun elaborate fantasies about our future. He talked about a trip to Napa Valley, tasting wine under the California sun. He talked about renovating the kitchen, adding a big island where we could entertain friends. He spoke with such convincing enthusiasm, all while I knew that this future was a mirage, one that he intended to fund with my father's money, and one in which I had no part. The food tasted like ash in my mouth. A permanent, heavy lump sat in my throat. As he talked, I found myself clinging to a passage from a book I'd started reading, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. A quote had burrowed into my mind and become a lifeline. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. I couldn't control Kalen's deception, but I could control my response. I could choose to be a soldier on a mission, not a victim in a cage. This thought was my shield. His arrogance grew with each passing day. Believing I was collapsing under the weight of his neglect, he became bolder, sloppier. One evening, his phone rang while we were in the living room. He answered, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "Hey, Sarah," he murmured. He walked to the other side of the room, his back to me, but I could hear the low cadence of his conversation. When he hung up, he turned to me, his face a mask of counterfeit sympathy. "Another veteran on the edge," he said, shaking his head sadly. "A young Marine. Just can't get his head right. I have to be there for them, you know." He was using my compassion, my respect for my fellow service members, as a cover for his crimes. The disgust was so potent, so vile, it felt like a physical poison in my veins. It was Marcus who gave me the final objective. "We need a silver bullet, Olivia," he'd said. "Something undeniable. We need to hear their intent, in their own words." He handed me a device that looked like an ordinary high-end ink pen. It was a state-of-the-art audio recorder. The challenge, he'd warned, is getting it in his office without him knowing. The opportunity had to be manufactured. The next morning, I made coffee, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. Kalen was on the phone, pacing in the kitchen, already in his crisp dress shirt for the day. It was another important call with Sarah. I knew this was my moment. I walked past him, holding my full mug. I feigned a stumble, lurching just enough for the hot coffee to splash across the front of his white shirt. "Oh my God, Kalen, I'm so sorry," I cried, my voice a pitch-perfect blend of shock and clumsiness. He cursed under his breath, ending the call abruptly. "Damn it, Liv, this shirt is brand new." He was more annoyed than angry, already peeling the stained fabric away from his skin as he headed for the master bathroom. The clock in my head started a frantic countdown. I had seconds. With his back turned, I moved. All my training kicked in, my movements swift and silent. I slipped into his office, the pen already in my hand. My eyes scanned for a location. Not too hidden, not too obvious. A small potted plant on the corner of his desk. Perfect. My fingers, slick with sweat, pushed the pen deep into the soil, nestled against the ceramic side. I turned and was out of the room, my back against the hallway wall, my breathing ragged. He emerged from the bedroom a moment later, buttoning a clean shirt. He hadn't noticed a thing. It couldn't have been more than 15 seconds, but it felt like the longest, most dangerous 15 seconds of my life. That night, I couldn't stay in the house. I drove to a deserted parking lot a few blocks away, the darkness of my truck a welcome shroud. I pulled out my phone and a pair of earbuds, my hands trembling as I connected to the pen's live feed. And then, I heard them. Their voices filled my ears, stripped of all pretense. They were laughing. "That little lamb is completely broken," Kalen's voice sneered, dripping with contempt. "She believes every word I say. We're almost there." Then came Serafina's reply, a sound so full of venom it made my stomach churn. "Good work, brother," she cooed. "Keep making it a living hell for her. Make sure she's the one who files. Mom and Dad would be so proud of us." Mom and Dad would be so proud. The words confirmed the final rotten piece of the puzzle. This wasn't just their sickness, it was an inheritance. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, as a single, hot tear of pure rage finally traced a path down my cheek. This recording wasn't just evidence, it was the silver bullet Marcus had talked about. With the bullet loaded, it was time to pull the trigger. The following evening, I set the stage for my final performance. I sat on the couch, not looking at him when he came into the room. I had spent an hour practicing the look in the bathroom mirror, a hollowed-out expression of utter defeat and exhaustion. "Kaylin," I began, my voice a carefully engineered tremble. I can't do this anymore." He looked over, his face a perfect picture of surprise. "Our marriage. There's no connection," I continued, letting my voice crack. "It's empty. I think we should get a divorce." He played his part beautifully. A flicker of shock, a deep, sorrowful sigh. He walked over, kneeling in front of me, taking my hands in his. "Liv, no. We can work through this," he pleaded. But as I looked into his eyes, past the masterful performance of a heartbroken husband, I saw it. A tiny, unmistakable glint of triumph that he couldn't quite conceal. He finally relented, agreeing, reluctantly, as if my decision had broken his heart. My performance had been a success. The trap was now officially set. The conference room at Kaylin's lawyer's office was exactly as I'd imagined. Cold, impersonal, and designed to make you feel small. As I sat beside Genevieve, I kept my back straight but my eyes downcast, channeling the image of a broken woman. In my head, a quote my father had made me read from Sun Tzu's The Art of War echoed like a mantra. "All warfare is based on deception." This room was my battlefield, and my weakness was my camouflage. Genevieve was brilliant, playing the part of a competent but unremarkable family lawyer, not the legal shark she truly was. She let Kaylin and his attorney lead the entire conversation. Kaylin was a master performer. He oozed a sorrowful confidence, speaking in low, compassionate tones about the tragedy of our collapsing marriage. He was so convincing that for a split second, even I almost believed him. His lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, slid a summary of the settlement terms across the polished mahogany table. It was exactly what the prenup stipulated. Kaylin, in a grand gesture of generosity, stated he wouldn't ask for a penny more than what was agreed upon. He wanted this to be as painless as possible for me. I could feel the smug satisfaction radiating from him. He thought he had me, a fragile little soldier, completely outmaneuvered. "Do you find these terms agreeable, Mrs. Vance?" his lawyer asked, his voice smooth and condescending. I didn't look up. I just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I forced a tremor into my hand as I reached for a glass of water. From the corner of my eye, I saw Kaylin share a subtle, triumphant glance with his attorney. My compliance, my utter submission, was exactly what they expected. It was the final confirmation they needed that their prey was broken and ready for slaughter. They had no idea they were the ones walking into the abattoir. The meeting concluded. As Genevieve and I stood to leave, Kaylin intercepted me in the hallway, his face a perfect mask of husbandly concern. "Olivia, I'm so sorry it's come to this," he said, his voice a soft, pitying whisper that made my skin crawl. "I truly had hoped for more for us." He paused, then delivered the killing blow, the one he thought would shatter me completely. "Maybe you should talk to a professional about everything you've been through in the Army." He let the words hang in the air, the implication clear. My service, my strength, my entire identity. He was twisting it into a pathology, a flaw that made me incapable of a healthy marriage. He was making himself the victim of my trauma. The audacity of it, the sheer, calculated cruelty, sent a bolt of white-hot rage through me. I wanted to break him. I wanted to wipe that sanctimonious look off his face with my bare hands. Instead, I looked at him, my eyes as empty and vacant as I could make them. "Thank you for your concern," I whispered. Then I turned and walked away. Every step away from him was a victory. I wasn't crumbling. I was waiting. That night, the pen was still active in his office. My earbuds became my window into his depravity. I listened as he called Serafina, the sound of his laughter echoing in my head. "It's done," he crowed, his voice giddy with victory. "The little soldier is completely crushed. She agreed to everything without a fight. Her lawyer is a total lightweight. We'll have the money in a week, maybe less." There was a pause, and I could practically hear his wicked grin. "Pack your bags, little sister. We're going to Bali." Their shared, triumphant laughter crackled through the feed. A few weeks ago, that sound would have destroyed me. Now, it didn't even sting. It was just noise. The meaningless celebration of two fools who had already lost the war and didn't even know it. Their victory was an illusion I had carefully crafted for them. The day to sign the final divorce petition arrived. The sky over Fayetteville was a clear, brilliant blue, a stark contrast to the storm I knew was about to break. I sat in Genevieve's comfortable office, the thick stack of legal documents on the table in front of me. This was the final act. Genevieve pointed to the signature line. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. I thought about Kalen's laughter, his fake pity, the way he'd tried to use my uniform as a weapon against me. This signature wasn't an act of surrender. It was an act of war. It was the authorization for Operation Tempest to commence. I signed my name, the ink flowing dark and decisive on the page. When I put the pen down, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a profound, cleansing sense of release. It was over. My part was done. Genevieve placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Now," she said, a predatory glint in her eyes, "the fun part begins." As she spoke those words, miles away, in the bustling financial district of Charlotte, Marcus Thorne sat in an unremarkable sedan across the street from a sleek, private bank. He adjusted his earpiece, his eyes fixed on the entrance. He watched as a black Mercedes sedan pulled up to the curb. Kalen and Serafina, dressed in designer clothes and laughing, stepped out. They were here to set up the accounts for their incoming windfall. The clock had started ticking. The storm was about to hit. They were celebrating a victory they thought they had won, completely unaware of the forces moving against them. If you are part of the unseen army standing with Olivia, support this story by hitting the like button and comment Operation Tempest to let us know you're ready for the storm. I sat in the passenger seat of Genevieve's car, parked a block away from her office. The world outside moved on. People walked dogs, carried groceries, lived their normal lives. But inside our vehicle, the air was thick with a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. My phone was dark in my lap. My hands were clasped around the cool metal of my father's dog tags, the chain wrapped tightly around my fingers. The raised letters of his name pressed into my skin. I wasn't praying for revenge. As I sat there, waiting for the signal that would change everything, I found myself praying for justice. For the Navy SEAL in San Diego. For the Army captain in Killeen. For every other name on the list we didn't even know yet. This was bigger than me now. It was for them. "It's in motion," Genevieve said, her voice calm and steady, a rock in the churning sea of my anxiety. She had just received a text from Marcus. "They're inside." I closed my eyes and pictured the scene as Marcus had described it would unfold. Kalen and Serafina, dressed to the nines in designer clothes, would be walking into the opulent lobby of the private bank in Charlotte. They'd be radiating success, smelling of expensive cologne and entitlement, believing they were just a few signatures away from their Bali getaway. The trap had been laid with meticulous care. The bank manager who greeted them was, in reality, a senior FBI agent who had been briefed by Marcus. He would welcome Mr. and Mrs. Vance with professional warmth, his smile never betraying the truth. "Welcome, Mr. Vance, Ms. Vance," he would say. "Everything is nearly in order. If you'll just follow me to our VIP lounge, we can go over the final details in comfort." He would lead them into a private, soundproofed room with plush leather chairs and a bottle of champagne chilling in a silver bucket. A final, decadent touch to inflate their egos right before the fall. I could almost hear Serafina's delighted laugh, the satisfying pop of the cork echoing like a starting pistol for their own execution. My phone vibrated in my lap, a sharp buzz that jolted me back to reality. A single text from Marcus. Showtime. Back in that VIP lounge, Kalen and Serafina would be raising their glasses, the crystal flutes clinking together in a premature toast. And just as the champagne touched their lips, the door would fly open. It wouldn't be the bank manager returning. It would be 3 plainclothes FBI agents, their faces grim and professional. moving with a speed and purpose that would suck all the air out of the room. And standing just behind them, framed in the doorway like the specter of their own damnation, would be Marcus Thorne. The lead agent's voice would be flat, devoid of emotion, cutting through their shock. Kaylin Vance, Serafina Vance, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and identity theft. I pictured Serafina's hand going slack, the champagne flute slipping from her fingers to shatter on the marble floor. A perfect, crystalline explosion that mirrored the implosion of their world. I imagined Kaylin's face shifting through a rapid series of emotions, from smug satisfaction to pale shock, then to a dark, furious red. There's been a mistake, he would snarl, the first words out of his mouth a lie. My lawyer will. He would never finish that sentence, because Marcus would step forward, and in his large hand, he would be holding a single, elegant ink pen. He would click it. And from that tiny device, Kaylin's own voice would fill the silent room. That little lamb is completely broken. We're almost there. Followed by Serafina's venomous reply. Good work, brother. Mom and Dad would be so proud of us. Checkmate. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a phrase, not a single word. Mission accomplished. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding for weeks. It came out as a ragged, shuddering sigh. The tension in my shoulders, the knot in my stomach, the crushing weight on my chest, it all began to dissolve. Genevieve looked over at me, and for the first time, a genuine, triumphant smile spread across her face. Let's go, Sergeant, she said. It's time to face the enemy. The drive to the FBI field office in Charlotte was a blur. When we arrived, Marcus met us. His usually stoic face held a deep, quiet satisfaction. He led us to an observation room. Through a large one-way mirror, I could see into an interrogation room, and there he was. Kaylin was slumped in a metal chair, the designer suit now looking cheap and ill-fitting. The confident swagger, the charming smile, the predatory gleam in his eyes, all of it was gone. He was just a man in a box, his hands bound in front of him by a pair of cold, steel handcuffs. All the power he had wielded over me had vanished, leaving behind nothing but a pathetic, defeated shell. He must have felt my gaze because he lifted his head and stared directly at the mirror. He couldn't see me, but our eyes locked across that impossible barrier. I expected to feel a surge of triumph, a wave of vindictive joy. I wanted to feel something, anything. But there was nothing. Only a profound, hollow emptiness. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange and silent calm. This chapter of my life was over. Later, Marcus sat with me and Genevieve in a small conference room. When we searched their apartment, he said, sliding a folder across the table, we found this. I opened it. Inside was a meticulously organized spreadsheet. It was a list, a prey list. There were dozens of names, all of them active-duty military personnel from bases across the country. Beside each name were notes, details on their recent inheritances, bonuses, or life insurance payouts. Some names had been crossed out, the ones they had already victimized. Others were marked as in progress or next target. My blood ran cold. My fight hadn't just been for me. My refusal to break, my decision to stand up, had thrown a wrench into a machine that was grinding up the lives of my brothers and sisters in arms. It had saved countless others from the same hell I had endured. In that moment, something inside me shifted, settled into place. I was no longer a victim. I was the protector. And my war was just beginning. The morning of my testimony, I stood before the full-length mirror in my bedroom. Laid out on the bed was a simple, conservative civilian suit Genevieve had recommended. But my eyes were on the uniform bag hanging from the closet door. My Army service uniform. The deep blue jacket, the perfectly creased trousers, the polished brass, and the colorful ribbon rack that told the story of my service. I made a decision. I wasn't going into that courtroom as Kaylin Vance's broken wife. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to be Sergeant Olivia Dean, United States Army. This wasn't just my story to tell. It was a report to be filed, a truth to be entered into the official record. I put on the uniform. Each piece felt like a layer of armor, not against bullets, but against the lies and manipulations that had nearly destroyed me. As I pinned on my medals and adjusted my rank insignia, I felt the woman who had been lost in the fog of betrayal begin to re-emerge, focused, disciplined, and ready for the mission ahead. When my name was called, the courtroom fell silent. I walked to the witness stand with the steady, measured pace of a soldier on parade. I could feel Kalen's eyes on me, burning into my back, but I refused to look at him. I kept my gaze fixed forward, first on the clerk who administered the oath, and then on the 12 faces in the jury box. They were the ones who mattered. They were the ones who needed to hear the truth. The prosecutor began his questions. My voice, when it came, was clear and calm, without a trace of the tremor I'd feigned for so long. I wasn't a weeping victim telling a sad story. I was an intelligence officer delivering a battlefield assessment. I laid out the facts one by one with precision and clarity. The financial documents, the fake office, the surveillance, the discovery of the marriage certificate and birth certificates, the insidious clauses in the prenuptial agreement. I presented the evidence logically, chronologically, building a case so solid and undeniable that the air in the room grew heavy with the weight of it. Then the prosecutor said, "Your Honor, the prosecution would like to play an audio recording for the court." He placed a small speaker on the railing of the jury box. A moment of silence, and then Kalen's voice filled the hallowed chamber, dripping with smug contempt. "It's done. That little soldier is completely crushed." A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Then came Serafina's venomous laughter, followed by the words that sealed their fate. "Good work, brother. Mom and Dad would be so proud of us." The sound of their mockery, so vile and triumphant, echoed off the wood-paneled walls. In that sterile, formal environment, their depravity was laid bare for all to see. It was only then that I allowed myself to look at Kalen. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at his hands, his face a blotchy, furious red. The mask was gone. The actor had forgotten his lines. All that was left was a small, pathetic man, choking on his own public humiliation. The defense attorney's cross-examination was as desperate as I expected. He tried to paint me as a jealous, scorned wife, an unstable woman who had concocted an elaborate fantasy to frame his innocent client. He insinuated that the pressures of military life had left me delusional, prone to paranoia. "Sergeant Dean," he sneered, "isn't it possible that the stresses of your occupation have made you see conspiracies where there are none?" I met his gaze without flinching. My voice was no longer calm. It was cold steel. "Sir," I said, my words sharp and clear, "the pressures of my occupation taught me how to identify the enemy, no matter what mask they wear." I turned my head slowly and looked directly at Kalen for the first time. And I am looking at an enemy right now. A gasp went through the gallery. The defense attorney stood there, mouth agape, utterly defeated. He had no more questions. During a recess, as I was walking down the marble hallway, a woman in a wheelchair approached me. She was wearing a Marine Corps sweatshirt, and I recognized her as one of the other women Marcus had identified. A prosthetic leg was visible below her knee. She was the Marine from California. "Sergeant Dean?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. Before I could answer, she reached out and pulled me into a fierce, one-armed hug. "Thank you," she whispered, her body trembling slightly. "You did what I didn't have the courage to do. You're a real hero." Tears streamed down her face, and in that moment, I understood. This victory wasn't just mine. After a week of testimony, the jury took only 2 hours to deliberate. When they filed back in, their faces were grim and set. I held my breath. The foreman stood. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we the jury find the defendant, Kalen Vance, guilty." The word landed like a hammer blow. "On the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of identity theft, we find the defendant guilty." It was a clean sweep. The judge delivered the sentences swiftly. For her role, Serafina Vance received 10 years in federal prison. For being the mastermind, Kalen Vance was sentenced to 15. As the bailiffs moved to cuff him, he turned and shot me a look of pure, undiluted hatred. But I just looked back, unafraid. His power was gone. The game was over. Outside, a swarm of reporters ambushed me, shouting questions, thrusting microphones in my face. I ignored them completely, walking straight through the chaos to where Genevieve and Marcus were waiting. "It's done," I said quietly. Marcus nodded, a look of profound respect in his eyes. "No, Sergeant," he replied. "We need to thank you." I stepped out from the shadow of the courthouse into the bright North Carolina sun. For the first time in months, I took a deep breath, and the air didn't feel heavy. It felt light. It felt free. The storm had finally passed. You would think that after the verdict, I would feel nothing but pure elation. I imagined myself celebrating, feeling the sweet, intoxicating taste of victory. But the reality was quiet. The days that followed the trial weren't filled with triumph. They were filled with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The adrenaline that had fueled me for months, the single-minded focus of the mission, had drained away, leaving a hollow space in its wake. The silence in the house I had once shared with Kaylin was deafening. Every corner held a ghost. Every room was a stage for a memory that was now revealed to be a lie. The spot on the couch where he'd read, the kitchen counter where he'd smiled at me over breakfast, the bed where he had turned his back on me, they were all tainted. The house wasn't a home, it was a crime scene. I gave myself permission to grieve, not for him, never for him, but for the woman I had been before, the naive, trusting woman who believed in the dream of a happy family, a loving partner. I wept for her, for the piece of her life that had been so cruelly stolen and twisted into a weapon against her. Genevieve had called me one evening, her voice gentle. "Allowing yourself to be vulnerable is a form of strength too, Sergeant," she'd said. And so, I did. For one full week, I did nothing. I slept. I read books that had nothing to do with warfare or strategy. I took long, quiet walks in the woods behind the house, letting the scent of pine and damp earth cleanse my soul. I let my mind rest. A few weeks after the sentencing, a letter arrived. The return address was a federal correctional institution. It was from Kaylin. My first instinct was to burn it, unopened. But curiosity, and perhaps a need for final closure, made me open it. The letter wasn't an apology. It was a tirade, page after page of venomous, self-pitying blame. He accused me of ruining his life, of being a vindictive monster, of trapping him. He never once admitted fault. He was still the victim in his own twisted narrative. I read the entire thing, and a strange thing happened. I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, no flicker of the old hurt. His words had no more power over me. He was just a pathetic man in a cage, rattling the bars. I calmly tore the letter into small, precise squares, let them fall into the trash can, and walked away. He wasn't a memory anymore. He was just garbage to be taken out. That was the turning point. I called a realtor the next day and put the house on the market. I couldn't build a new future surrounded by the ghosts of a fraudulent past. While packing, I came across a box in the back of the closet, the wedding box. Inside were the professional photos of our wedding day, our smiling faces a grotesque mockery. There were cheap, thoughtless gifts he'd given me, things I had once cherished as signs of affection. Looking at them now, I saw only props from a well-rehearsed play. The old Olivia might have destroyed them in a fit of rage. But I wasn't her anymore. I calmly picked up the box, carried it outside to the large trash receptacle by the curb, and dropped it in. The sound it made was a dull, final thud. It wasn't an act of hatred. It was an act of release. I wasn't just clearing out a house, I was clearing out my mind. On the advice of a senior officer, I started attending a support group on base for female service members. Walking in that first time was harder than walking into the courtroom. But inside, I found a circle of women, soldiers, Marines, airmen, who understood the unique pressures of our lives. They listened without judgment as I shared my story, not as a star witness, but as a sister. And that's where I saw Maya again, the Marine from the trial. After the meeting, we sat and talked for hours. She told me her story, A hauntingly similar tale of how the Vance siblings had conned her out of a significant portion of her disability benefits after she'd lost her leg in Iraq. We came from different branches, different backgrounds, but we were bound by the same scar. We didn't talk about revenge, we talked about survival, about putting one foot in front of the other and moving forward. Her friendship became a steady anchor in the turbulent waters of my recovery. Slowly, I began to build new fortifications, not for a base, but for myself. I started setting boundaries. I learned the power of the word no. I learned to trust my intuition, that quiet inner voice I had silenced for so long in favor of Kaylin's sweet-sounding lies. I poured my energy into my career, into my soldiers, into my friendship with Maya. I was redefining my life on my own terms. One crisp autumn afternoon, I drove out to Sand Hills State Veterans Cemetery. The rows of identical white headstones stood in silent, perfect formation under the Carolina blue sky. I found my father's marker and knelt, placing a bouquet of simple, white chrysanthemums on the grass. The wind whispered through the tall pines, a sound of profound peace. "I did it, Dad," I whispered, my hand resting on the cool stone. "I protected your legacy, and I finally learned how to protect myself." I stayed there for a long time, letting the quiet dignity of the place seep into me. The war was over. The battle for my life, my honor, and my future had been won. The year that followed the trial was one of quiet, deliberate reconstruction. I sold the house, bought a small, clean apartment for myself, and focused on the two things that had always been true: my soldiers and my mission. But a new mission had begun to take shape, born from the ashes of my own. There's a quote from the researcher Brené Brown that I came across during that time, and it became my mantra. You either walk inside your story and own it, or you stand outside your story and hustle for your worthiness. I had walked through the fire of my story. Now it was time to own it. With Maya by my side and the brilliant legal guidance of Genevieve, I took a portion of the assets I had fought so hard to protect and poured it into something new. We established the Dean Shield Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to what we called financial and emotional readiness for service members and veterans. Its purpose was simple: to provide the education, legal resources, and peer support needed to recognize and combat the kind of predatory, emotional, and financial fraud that had almost destroyed us. The name was a dual honor. For my father, Command Sergeant Major Dean, and for the shield I had been forced to build for myself. It was a legacy of protection. On the day of the Foundation's official launch, I stood at a podium in a small community hall in Fayetteville. The room was filled with faces. I saw Genevieve and Marcus in the front row, their expressions a mixture of pride and quiet satisfaction. I saw Maya, my partner in this new mission, giving me a confident nod. And scattered throughout the crowd were other service members, men and women whose lives had been touched by my story, who had reached out, who had found the courage to share their own. When I spoke, I didn't talk about betrayal. I didn't mention Kaylin or Serafina. I talked about vigilance. I talked about community. I talked about the strength that comes from speaking the truth, no matter how much it hurts. They count on our silence, I told them. They thrive in the shadows of our shame. But when one of us finds the courage to turn on a light, it gives others permission to do the same. And in that light, they can't hide. My service in the 82nd Airborne continued, a constant source of stability and purpose. One clear morning, I found myself standing at the open door of a C-130, the roar of the engines a familiar symphony. Below me, the sprawling green landscape of North Carolina stretched out to the horizon. There was a time when the thought of a free fall, of trusting my life to a sheet of nylon and a series of practiced movements would have terrified me. The fear of being out of control had been overwhelming. But standing there, with the wind whipping at my face, I didn't feel fear. I felt an exhilarating sense of freedom. The jumpmaster gave the command. I leaped from the plane, not into an abyss of uncertainty, but into the vast, open sky. As the parachute billowed open above me with a reassuring snap, I looked down at the world, and I smiled. This wasn't a fall. It was a flight. I was leaving the wreckage of the past far behind, trusting myself, my equipment, and the brothers and sisters in the air around me. Life found a new, gentler rhythm. The story didn't end with a whirlwind romance or a dramatic new wedding. It found its footing in something much more real. At a weekend unit BBQ, filled with the smell of grilled ribs and the sound of easy laughter, a fellow officer named Matt, a man who had offered quiet support without ever being intrusive, walked over to me. He didn't bring flowers or make grand pronouncements. He handed me a cold beer and a paper plate piled high with brisket. We just talked. About our work, about football, about the ridiculousness of a new training directive. It was simple, unforced, and honest. For the first time in years, I found myself laughing without a defensive wall around my heart. A new chapter could begin, I realized. But this time, I would be the one writing the rules. The story ends here, but my mission continues. Last week, I stood in front of a classroom of new recruits, fresh-faced and full of a nervous hope that I knew all too well. They were the future of the Army, the next generation of protectors. I was there to give them a workshop on behalf of the Dean Shield Foundation. I looked at their young, earnest faces, and I saw a reflection of the woman I used to be. Your strength isn't just in the weapon you carry or the uniform you wear, I told them, my voice warm and steady. Your greatest strength is in here, I said, pointing to my head. And in here, I finished, pointing to my heart. Guard them fiercely, trust your instincts, and know this, above all else, you are never, ever alone. As I looked out at them, I saw understanding dawning in their eyes. I was no longer just Sergeant Olivia Dean, a survivor of a terrible betrayal. I was a warrior who had won her war and had returned not with scars of defeat, but with a map for others to find their way home. I had taken my story, and I had owned it. And in doing so, I had turned my greatest wound into my greatest weapon. Thank you for walking with me through my story. Sharing it wasn't easy, but your presence has been a light in the process. My journey started in darkness, but I hope it serves as proof that our deepest wounds can become our greatest strengths. I know so many of you have fought your own silent battles. Please know that your resilience is seen, and your story matters. If you believe in the power of these stories, please subscribe and hit the like button. It helps this channel reach others who need to hear that they are not alone. Comment, rise up below to honor the warrior in you.